All right, thank you. All right, thank you everybody for coming to the Justice in Ventura County Candidate Forum for candidates for the Ventura County Sheriff's Office as well as for the District Attorney's Office. Um, Again, thank you all for coming. We are really excited to announce that we had over 230 registrations, many of whom will be attending via Zoom as well as tuning in online on the live Facebook feed. I would also like to acknowledge the organizations who have co-sponsored this event, and that is CAUSE, which stands for, I have hold my notes here, I'm sorry about that. CAUSE stands for Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, Black Lawyers of Ventura County, Santa Paula Latino Town Hall, Get Out the Vote Ventura County, Community Advocacy Coalition, Latinx Bar Association, Diversify Our Narrative, and Indivisible, Caneo, and Buen Vecino. I'd also like to acknowledge the individuals from these organizations who have worked really hard to put this forum together so that all of us can make a more informed choice when we cast our vote next month, very, very soon. So I'd like to thank John Cummings from Indivisible, Willie Lupka from Buen Vecino, Nydia Bayo from CAUSE, myself, Rabia Rahman from Black Lawyers of Ventura County, Cynthia Salas from Santa Paula Latino Town Hall, Ted Bagley and Dr. Irene Pinkert from Get Out the Vote, Ventura County, Angela Timmons from Community Advocacy Coalition, Vanessa Frank from Latinx Bar Association, as well as Vanessa Valdez. And so thank you all for your hard work and dedication to bringing this forum to be. And there's another thing I wanted to address. So there have been a lot of questions from the audience and from individuals who wanted to know the selection process for our questions. The coalition members did work together to draft and prepare the questions tonight. So we will not, unfortunately, be able to take questions from the audience. So that was the selection process for the questions. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to speak further with myself or with any of the organizers to further explain our selection process for the questions. Okay, so without any further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for the sheriff's debate. Give me 1 second. I know his name, I just want to give his bio. Hold on. All right, give me 1 second. I think he also comes with no need for an introduction. Mr. Perry Martin. Give me 1 second. You guys, I'm sorry about this. I'll be more prepared for when I introduce Frank Barajas, I promise. All right, Professor Perry Martin Jr. is an educator, advocate, and is a retired U.S. Army Sergeant Major. His journey began in Jackson, Mississippi, took him around the globe, and landed him in Ventura and Los Angeles counties. He is a committed leader in the fight for social and racial justice. Perry, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone here in person as well as live streaming. I will briefly go over some of the ground rules prior to getting started. Now, both of the candidates have already been provided a set of the ground rules. Is that correct, Sheriff? Commander?
Yes, sir.
All right. For the audience's purposes, just be informed that this will be recorded as well as live streamed. A coin toss took place prior to this event to determine the order of responses. And the candidate that won has chosen to answer the questions first. Outside of the introduction of the candidates, no technology other than the microphones will be used during this forum. For the sake of time, this forum was scheduled for 55 minutes. Now, are you able to see the timekeeper right up front? You have to turn it around. All right. If you would, keep in mind and glance down. If not, as a moderator, what I will do is ask you to complete your statement or finish your sentence What I will not try to do, but if necessary, is to stop you, to keep you on track if necessary. Fair enough? All right. At the end, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to provide closing statements. And these closing statements will give those candidates an opportunity to speak about themselves rather than make charges or attacks that have been previously raised in this forum. Any violations of this and during this statement, I may offer the other candidate an opportunity to pose a rebuttal. The first candidate, Bill Ayub, is a 36-year veteran of law enforcement, and he is currently serving as the 20th elected sheriff of Ventura County. Bill is a third-generation Venturan who has committed his life to public service, his entire life to public service. He has a passion for his chosen profession. He is driven to keep our community safe, despite the many challenges the community has faced in his term as sheriff. Welcome. Jim Fryhoff is one of Ventura County's Sheriff Office most accomplished leaders, a two-time Deputy of the Year and Medal of Valor recipient. Fryhoff spent 31 years working to protect Ventura County. He has twice been police chief in both Ojai and Thousand Oaks, and is currently operations commander of the Detention Services Division of the Sheriff's Office. Now that those introductions have been made, as the MC pointed out, there's been great diligence in preparing these questions. These questions are pretty lengthy, so I ask that you use the notebook and pen provided for you in order to hit every point, if possible, of the questions. So I'll begin with the first question directed to Sheriff. A number of years ago, the FBI published a report addressing the infiltration of white supremacist groups within our law enforcement community. Just last week, a state audit of law enforcement agencies in California showed a pattern of bias against people of color, immigrants, women, LGBTQ residents, as well as a disturbing amount of support for far-right groups such as the Proud Boys and the 3%ers. How would you assess systemic racism within the Ventura County Sheriff's Office? Beyond implicit bias training, what specific actions will you take to root out bias within the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, investigate complaints about deputies' interactions with residents, and hold them accountable if they exhibit such bias?
That's a great question, and some very important issues that are very contemporary to law enforcement these days. We've seen incidents around the country that speak to these issues. Locally, we have a very robust process for screening the people that come to our organization looking for employment. That applies to deputy sheriff candidates, it applies to volunteers, it applies to our professional staff employees. We have an absolutely committed team of professionals that investigate complaints that come in from the community and complaints that are generated from within the organization when we identify something that doesn't look right, and the exhibition of bias or extremist ideology, behavior that could be shown through social media posts, through commentary that's made to coworkers and so forth. We look at those issues very closely, and we take appropriate action depending on the nature of those things. The profession is dynamic, and employees can change over time when they experience traumatic behavior. And so we guard against those employees that have made it through the screening process and are currently serving the community, and in the way that we look and see if there's any signs of things going afoul, we take corrective action immediately. And we have a very well-established and robust disciplinary process to ensure that that behavior is not something that permeates our agency.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, like the sheriff said, this is a very great question based on what we've seen here in the last few years in particular, the concerns that our communities have on disparate treatment towards communities of color and minorities. One of the challenges that we have is we want to make sure that our community feels safe and that when they see law enforcement, they don't see law enforcement as part of the problem. One of the things that I would like to do as sheriff is to develop this community partnerships. Community policing for too long has been what law enforcement agencies did to communities. Community partnerships allows us to work collaboratively with the communities that we serve to address their concerns in a manner that's going to have better outcomes for everybody. When we look at our hiring process, we want to make sure we're hiring really good professionals. We need to make sure we're paying to have professionals here locally. We have a policy that makes officers accountable for reporting misbehavior. If they don't report the misbehavior, they too are held accountable for that same behavior. That which we tolerate, we condone, and we cannot tolerate abuses of any kind or disparate treatment of anybody in our community at all. The accountability is, as mentioned, we have a very good process for vetting out employees who do have complaints. And we also have a process to hold them accountable when they have violated the public's trust, something that we need to make sure we always stay vigilant on. One of the other things that I would like to bring is there's software out there that's available. So when we have an interaction with our community, we will proactively send the message out to the community that we're serving so they can report back how they felt they were treated and whether or not we have a problem. That too will add red flags for those who might have issues that we need to be aware of to be able to protect our community.
All right, just to be clear, you were speaking in terms of complaints, in terms of racist complaints. Is that correct?
All bias complaints.
All complaints, but not specifically as to the question, racist complaints, the software.
It's for all complaints. As your question was for both show bias towards minorities, the LGBTQ as well. I want to make sure that the complaints that the process that we will have will address complaints of all natures, period.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up and clarity for the audience, are officers prohibited or are they allowed to join or affiliate themselves with far-right groups such as the Proud Boys and 3%ers?
We currently have prohibitions against extremist behavior by our employees. And so I think it depends on the nature of the organization that you speak of and what that person's affiliation could be with that organization.
So are you aware of any officers that are affiliated with either of those two specific organizations that we mentioned in this question, the Proud Boys or 3%ers?
I am not aware of any of our employees that have those affiliations.
Thank you. Are you aware of any officers being affiliated with either the Proud Boys or the 3%ers?
No, I am not. And I would like to believe with the women and men that I work with, that if they were aware that somebody was, they would report it immediately.
Thank you. The next question covers immigration and cooperation with ICE. In recent years, since the passage of SB 54 and the implementation of the Truth Act, many counties across the state have set policies that go beyond the law's minimum requirements and end voluntary collaboration by local law enforcement with federal immigration enforcement, including notifying ICE of release dates and transferring people into ICE custody. They have recognized that cooperation with ICE results in discriminatory and unequal treatment of immigrants in our community, overwhelmingly impacts people of color, weakens trust between law enforcement and immigrant communities, undermines public safety, and results in double punishment. Sheriff Ayub, you have set county policy on this matter for nearly 4 years now. And Commander Fryhoff, you currently oversee the county jail. What is your position on continuing the sheriff's office practice of voluntarily participating in federal immigration enforcement? And will you commit to ending the department's practice of notifying ICE of people's release dates and transferring immigrants in Ventura County to ICE?
So obviously the sheriff's policy has been that we will continue to abide by the law as prescribed, Senate Bill 54. And the Truth Act, making sure that we're making notifications of those when ICE wants to talk to anybody that's in our custody, that we comply with that to make sure they know they don't have to speak with ICE if they do not want to. The notification to ICE right now, in the manner it's done, is with somebody is being released, they'll be notified that they're being released, but we do not hold them for ICE to show up. I will commit that I will talk to the other agencies in the county about what this looks like to be able to not have people who have done disparate or have done harm to our community, to see if there's a change needed in our compliance with Senate Bill 54. I know I'm well aware there are other counties that have done this where they do not comply with Senate Bill 54. I'd like to see what their process has been, and have they seen an increase in crime as a result of their lack of cooperation with ICE or notifying ICE with somebody who has committed an offense that's outlined in Senate Bill 54. The important thing that people need to know is that local law enforcement has no business involved with immigration enforcement. Because when we have involvement in immigration enforcement, it creates distrust in law enforcement. And then they're afraid to call us. And if our community members are afraid to call law enforcement, all we've done is created a bunch more victims in our community. It's really important that they trust us and that we are here to serve everybody in our community.
After reviewing the policy of the other counties, as you say, and you find that it does not have any adverse impact on crime, will you commit to end the voluntary outside of what's prescribed by the law? Will you commit to ending the cooperation and collaboration with ICE that's voluntary?
I would like to see what the impact is before I commit to that decision, but I will commit to giving a thorough dissertation and look at what the impact on our community would be. Because if it's a second punishment, as was stated, if that second punishment keeps from somebody else being victimized in our community, then we need to evaluate that too, because we do not want to create additional victims in our community as well.
Thank you. Chair.
This is a very serious issue. Immigration enforcement has been the topic of conversation for many years now. SB 54 was enacted to prevent the communication with ICE by local law enforcement, with the exception of serious offenders in the community. And I've maintained a policy of complying with Senate Bill 54. The Truth Act deals with some notifications, making community presentations, taking community input, and so forth. But as Senate Bill 54 is what governs our ability to interact with ICE. It's done in a very infrequent basis today. The people that we do communicate with ICE about are the most serious offenders in our community. And most cases, they commit offenses against the very people that we are trying to protect, the immigrants that come to this country that are making their way, working in agricultural industry or other areas that are of importance to our economy. And so my sworn duty is to protect the public, to keep criminals out of our community, to drive crime down. I believe that people that come to our community that offend and victimize other people deserve to be held to answer. And so that's why I've communicated with ICE. Now, what we have done is we've partnered with the Public Defender's Office to review the rare these days instances where we do make notifications to ICE, just to make sure that we're in complete compliance with the law and to have a collegial relationship with our justice partners.
Sheriff, do you foresee, if elected for another term, that you would end the voluntary aspect of compliance with Senate Bill 54, just as other sheriffs have done in other communities? Do you see yourself voluntarily ending the current policy and no longer collaborating with ICE other than what's strictly mandated?
I have no immediate intention to end voluntary compliance with SB 54. I will commit to continuing to meet with advocacy groups, to listen to presentations, to review data. And that is what I will commit to.
And if that data proves to be favorable toward the voluntary, would you commit to that once you find out the data supported?
I commit to a thorough review of that data. I am looking at community safety. It is important that people have trust in their law enforcement, that they report incidents. And if I find that there's evidence that there would be an increased relationship where reporting takes place, I think that's something worthy of consideration.
Thank you. The next topic is disparity in law enforcement responses to protests reflecting different ideological viewpoints. Over the last 2 years, community members have perceived a strong disparity in local law enforcement responses to protests reflecting different ideological viewpoints. In the summer of 2020, VCSO repeatedly shut down streets and even freeways to steer motorists away from peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters in Thousand Oaks and in other parts of the county. No such interventions from law enforcement have accompanied the numerous move the needle protests on the freeway overpasses, despite their impact on traffic below. Most recently, VCSO has declined to take action during repeated appearances of neo-Nazis on overpasses, hanging signs and flying drones in illegal manners. When asked why, the typical response has been that the Nazis' First Amendment rights outweigh illegality and public endangerment in determining the department's response. Why did the same concern not apply to the Black Lives Matter protesters' right to air their grievances in public? And how do you plan to treat public protests if you are elected?
We've seen a number of these incidents over the last several of years, and our approach actually countywide, even with the local police agencies, has been unified. In fact, I was the chair of the Ventura County Law Enforcement Coordinating Committee during 2020 when we had a great deal of social unrest related to the murder of George Floyd. And our approach then and our approach now has been one to facilitate the demonstration of First Amendment rights, regardless of the message. And that is what we are sworn to do. We're sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of California. Regardless of the message, First Amendment rights are critical to our democracy. We talk about the incident with the White Lives Matter, people unfurling banners over the overpass, and that it could be distracting to the traffic below. And I agree that it could be. But for years, people have been on overpasses waving flags, holding car wash signs, holding political signs, and doing a variety of things that are purposefully distracting to traffic. They're drawing attention to their message. And we've allowed that to occur for many years throughout the state. And we've created an environment where that is a public forum, where it's permissible behavior. Our role is to facilitate that peaceful activity and to provide safety for those people engaged in activity. If that activity spills into the streets or endangers traffic or creates some other type of public safety concern, we will take action such as diverting traffic, closing roadways, getting into conversations with those engaged in that First Amendment activity.
So, Sheriff, does that mean that it's just merely a perception that law enforcement is not acting against those neo-Nazi groups versus deliberately acting toward Black Lives Matter protesters?
Well, I can't speak to the specifics of those incidents. I was there for many. I was not present for any incidents where traffic was closed, but I give a great deal of latitude and discretion to my supervisors and managers in the field to make decisions that are in the best interest of the community's public safety. So my expectation is that we treat everybody with the same respect and the same approach, regardless of the message, regardless of the origins of that First Amendment activity.
So is it a fair assumption that there could have been times that that discretion was used, it wasn't used appropriately?
Well, there's always that possibility that discretion is not applied appropriately or evenly, but we have different people in the communities that view things differently. So, yeah, I would expect that we create an environment where that First Amendment activity can take place without our involvement. When many of these events were happening in the community, you didn't see any police officers or deputy sheriffs anywhere around, and that was to not provide a suppressive environment for that activity to take place. We wanted it to take place. That's what we're charged with doing, is allowing constitutional activity to occur. But in terms of dealing in a disparate way based on the groups or the type of messaging, that shouldn't happen.
Thank you.
I'll start with this. There's no room for hate in our communities. It's destructive to the fabric of our communities when people are distributing hate material or waving hate banners anywhere. First Amendment protected activities are that. They are protected by the First Amendment, and we're charged with upholding that Constitution that protects it. And we need to make sure we do it in a way that is not disparate between one group of protesters and another. What the protesters do may trigger a reaction from law enforcement, such as diverting traffic if it's created a hazardous environment, an immediate hazardous environment. I understand that the protest on the overpass is distracting to the drivers down below, but I think that that's why those, no matter who's been there, the Move the Needle and most recently the neo-Nazis, they had not shut the traffic down because people were just seeing it no different than a traffic accident. I know in one incident in Thousand Oaks where protesters actually were in the roadway while the lights were changing and were banging on cars as they were going by, which is why the traffic was diverted, because they were creating a hazardous environment to people inside their vehicles at that moment. There was a second time where they were closed, and I was not there. I was not present for that also, and I don't know what triggered the need to close the roadway down. But I spent a lot of time.
Are you talking specifically about the Black Lives Matter protest where the roads were closed
Yes,
down and banged on the car?
Yes.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time in that year and a half I was in Thousand Oaks when we had the protest, reaching out to the protest organizers as the chief and just explaining, we're here to support you. We understand you're upset with what's going on. We also are upset with what we saw. The George Floyd murder is completely unacceptable, and we would not tolerate that here in our community. And it was important for people to show their frustration, and many people did. I wanted to reach out to let them know that we supported them, and much like the sheriff said, we did not want to have a show of force by having officers present, other than to go and just shake their hands and say, we're here to support you. And that's what we did.
All right, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, that there was a tremendous amount of diligence gone into crafting these questions. However, one issue that has arisen since this that has the potential to divide our nation even further and also cause protests to be expand exponentially. And that is the leak of the Supreme Court Roe versus Wade. Now, this this position is an elected position, therefore there's politics involved. But we would like to think that the people will vote for the best candidate. What is your view on Roe versus Wade being overturned?
Obviously, the Supreme Court has this challenge, and the leaked report is clearly showing that they're leaning to overturn it. Without having read what their report is, I don't know if there's exceptions to what that overturning looks like. But I know on the drive here, I received notification that there's protests currently in Thousand Oaks as a result of that leaked information. Our charge as the sheriff and public safety here locally is to make sure that those that are protesting can do so in a safe manner that doesn't affect the rest of our citizens negatively. Once again, much like we just talked about with the BLM protests, they're allowed to protest. It's a First Amendment protected activity. And clearly this is something that's very divisive for our country. And it's not for us to weigh in on that, much like many laws that are passed in our country. We are the enforcer of those laws, not the decider of those laws. But when the people need to protest, we're going to make sure they have a venue to do so. They can do so in a safe manner to express their views.
Thank you.
This is a very concerning issue for me. I've been following it closely. We had some demonstrations in the county yesterday, and I imagine there'll be some more to follow, and certainly the potential for much more, depending on what the court ultimately decides to do. This is an elected position, and but it's nonpartisan, and I don't believe bringing politics into the office is beneficial for the public of Ventura County. Our role simply is to keep the peace in the community. And that's something we aim to do. We'll provide for First Amendment activity, regardless of what that message is and regardless of who's doing it. And we will do everything we can to keep the peace and make sure that Ventura County remains one of the safest places to live and play and visit.
All right, thank you. And it's safe to say that there will be no disparity between the pro or for or against neither groups. Is that correct?
That is safe to say.
Safe to say. Is that safe to say, based on your response, there will be no disparity between the pro-choice, pro-life?
Absolutely not.
All right, thank you. The next question is the topic. It covers school resource officers in the school to prison pipeline. Data compiled over years and across many communities show that school resource officers can create more problems than they can solve. Their presence results in arrests of young people in schools at more than 3 times the rate of schools without school resource officers, even when there's no disparity in the incidence of criminal behavior between schools that are policed or not. Additionally, students of color and students with visible and invisible disabilities are arrested and referred to law enforcement at a significantly higher rate than their white non-disabled counterparts. Senior school resource officers contribute to the school to prison pipeline that is devastating to some demographics, including Ventura counties. What is your position on the continued presence of the officers in our county schools, and what steps can be taken to increase stakeholder engagement and help support the communities most impacted by the school to prison pipeline?
Thank you for that great question. This was a large topic of conversation in 2020 and clearly continues to still be a topic of discussion. I'm a strong supporter of resource officers in our schools. I believe, hearing those statistics and that report is alarming, but I don't think you can overlay that onto what happens in Ventura County, specifically in the sheriff's jurisdiction. Our deputies that are on campuses throughout the county are there for consistency and continuity and for relationship building. We would still respond to schools for concerns related to criminal behavior or disturbances and so forth. But if we did not have them, we would just have a deputy that's patrolling the community, would have no investment in that school, would not know the teachers, the parents, the students. The school resource officers develop those relationships over time. In fact, when this was being discussed in 2020, I had young people coming forward and saying, my school resource officer is my best friend. This person made such a lasting impact on me that's my best friend. Please don't let them take school resource officers away from our schools. They're not on campus to be an enforcement arm. They're on campus to provide a measure of security, to build relationships with the school, the district, the parents, the students, and I'm a big proponent of leaving them on campuses.
Does that relationship building outweigh the disparate treatment of 3 times more likely for individual students of color to be sent through that prison to school to prison pipeline?
In that context, no. But I would submit to you that we are not seeing that type of interaction locally. If we did see indications that our school resource officers were handling the students in a disparate way, exhibiting bias and so forth, we would take action. Our school resource officers are hand selected and really just do a phenomenal job in the community.
So at this point, no plan to change the policy that's in place with the school resource officers?
No, sir.
Thank you.
And I would agree with that. I oversaw the first school resource officer program in Thousand Oaks when we transitioned from the DARE program to SROs. I strongly believe that our SROs provide guidance, support, a good adult example for our youth. This may be their only interaction they have an opportunity to have with law enforcement. And our officers wear a subdued uniform, so they don't have that same authoritarian look. They're wearing a polo shirt, BDUs, a softer approach so that our youth, parents, teachers can feel comfortable talking to them where they may not otherwise. They're not there as a centurion guard to keep kids in line to the school. They're there as a resource, hence the resource officer title. And we do go through a significant vetting process of those that we pick that have to be skilled at communicating with the youth, teachers, and parents. And much like was said, if we get word or we have information that there's misconduct due to disparate treatment of our students, we will definitely take swift action to not only hold the officer accountable, but potentially even remove them from the school. And we put a lot of weight in what the schools say about their SROs. And it's been my experience that the principals and the staff and the students do see the SROs as somebody that they can look up to, that they can work with. And if we were to just remove them without cause, would be devastated. We have an opportunity to build a very positive relationship in that environment so they get to see what law enforcement has to offer and why we are part of the community. Our officers have kids that go to these schools as well. We want to be part of the solution. We are here to serve and protect the community we serve, and I think our SROs are a great example of that.
Thank you. How do you explain the higher rate of students being arrested when SROs are present versus when they are not?
I think that when the SROs are not present, the school may handle the discipline in a different fashion, or they don't want to wait for law enforcement to arrive. But I also would like to believe that the study you're referring to is not specific to Ventura County. There are, as we talked about with hiring earlier on, we go through great lengths to hire professionals to do the job here in California, and we pay them to be professionals, and we have a process to eliminate those who are not. So I would like to think that those issues that are quoted in that study do not have the same accuracy here in Ventura County. And if we saw that, then we would need to take swift action, because that is not our role to be the centurion guard at our schools.
Thank you. The next topic is on mental health and homelessness. According to California Department of Justice, persons experiencing mental illness or who have intellectually and developmental disabilities are far likely to sustain serious bodily injuries during encounters with law enforcement. During a recent 4-year period, the numbers were over 50% and fully 83% respectively. In many cases, the 911 call is the default option or the only one available. For people seeking mental health crisis intervention, often in the context of homelessness, officers arrive at the scene armed with deadly weapons and often ill-equipped to handle an individual experiencing a mental health crisis. The consequences can be intimidating, frightening, and even devastating. To what extent do you believe we should reallocate public resources away from law enforcement responses in such situations to emphasize mental health professionals or crisis teams? And what steps should you take? What steps should be taken to ensure that people experiencing mental health challenges and homelessness are steered toward treatment rather than arrested and jailed?
Great question. So when I was the assistant chief of police in Thousand Oaks, I created the very first vulnerable population position for the city to work with not only what the county had to offer for services, but also the nonprofits and the non-governmental organizations, knowing that arresting alone is not sufficient. And letting officers respond one at a time to calls also was not effective, because the officers didn't get to know those experiencing homelessness in our community. So I created this first vulnerable population position, and I tasked that officer with getting to know all the resources that exist in the county, what they bring to bear to offer, and then make sure they get them out to provide services to those experiencing homelessness. By doing so, the officer got to know all the people experiencing homelessness, so when they are in crisis, They already know who they're dealing with, what the issues are, and maybe how to de-escalate those issues because of the relationship they've established. When I went to Ojai as the chief of police, I didn't have extra staff in Ojai. Ojai is our smallest contract city. So I took 2 officers. They said, in addition to your normal duties, you're going to be my vulnerable population officers here. Get to know all the resources that the county has, our nonprofit and non-governmental organizations in the Ojai Valley to provide services to those experiencing homelessness here too. Once again, we know that enforcement alone is not a strategy. I also sit on the Behavioral Health Advisory Board as the law enforcement representative. The board is comprised of not only government officials, but parents of those who are consumers and consumers themselves to understand where the gaps in service are. I don't believe that defunding law enforcement is where we need to be. What we need to do is make sure that we are funding appropriately the services that we can bring to, so we have a co-response model with crisis responders who are not first responders. So they have the security when they go into homeless encampments that people are potentially in crisis or medicating with illegal substances and may not have a rational outcome and could put them in harm's way. So I think that the co-responder model is where we need to be. This is not a this or that. This is a together process. Thank you.
Okay, just to be clear, the question didn't state about defunding the police or the sheriff, but about reallocating resources. So do you support reallocating available? I understand that there was limited or scarce resources in other places, but here, do you support reallocating resources toward mental health or crisis management teams?
Yeah, so that's what I believe I did in Thousand Oaks was I reallocated. I took an officer who was normally assigned to a directed enforcement unit, and I reallocated that resource to specifically get to know those experiencing homelessness, to make sure that we can provide the adequate services with all the other county partners and the non-government organizations that we have. So I do believe in it, and I did it. There's now 2 officers that do that in Thousand Oaks, and like you said, in Ojai, I didn't have extra resources, so I made do with what I did have.
Does that include mental health professionals? I understand you have reallocated officers, but will this include mental health professionals if given the opportunity?
And we did include mental health professionals to work with us as part of the county process. I don't get to determine what behavioral health where they send their crisis team, but we did have them come and help us when we were going out and into the encampments to make sure that we could provide services, including backpack medicine, which provided medication to those who needed it to help with those who are experiencing significant mental health issues.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Homelessness, mental illness are 2 of my focus priorities when I took office. I saw them as a growing problem in our community, and I still see that those 2 issues, which are commingled in my view, is one of our top issues of the day, countywide. And we actually established our first vulnerable population officer in I believe it was 2013 in Camarillo. That person was tasked with directly interfacing with the homeless community to identify who those individuals were, where they were living, to build a relationship with them and have some consistency in dealing with those individuals and to work to try and get them out of homelessness. It has developed over time into a robust program with 2 deputies specifically assigned in Thousand Oaks, 1 in Camarillo, others on a collateral basis at our other stations. And I've established a 20-person homeless liaison unit to focus on the chronic problems of homeless developments taking over open space and encroaching in cities and the associated issues that come with those. The mental illness component is key. We see a rising incidence of the mentally ill in our jails, in our interactions with members of the community. We've done a great job of training our deputies in crisis intervention team principles. That's carried over into our dispatchers, into our civilian jail employees. It continues to be a top priority of mine to make sure that training is funded and sustained and done countywide. All of the police officers are trained in those issues for the municipal police agencies as well. And I think it's something we need to continuously focus on and adapt to. We have added a whole person care model to the issue, bringing in the faith-based community, food resources, housing, behavioral health, healthcare agency, and other stakeholders to make sure that we're addressing this as a global issue to try and get people out of homelessness, to get them the services that will help address their mental illness, their drug dependency. And it's important to me that we make inroads in this respect because without that holistic response to it, we're really just going to be, squeezing the balloon. The issue is going to go from one place to another.
And Sheriff, do you support reallocating additional funds or resources if that proves to be much more effective than what is currently being conducted?
I think in the interest of good government, we need to do what is best to address issues in the community. Uh, Reallocating resources means taking away something from me and giving it to somebody else. And I have what I need to get the job done in the community right now. I'm still going to need deputies and employees to do other things to address issues of violence related to that community. We've had a crisis intervention team in Ventura County for more than 30 years, and they've been primary points of contact on individuals in mental health crisis in the community. We also have a partnership with Behavioral Health Now. We call it our RISE program that we've obtained grant funding for. So we have a full-time behavioral health clinician riding with our vulnerable population deputy in Camarillo. And so that co-responder approach is incredibly effective. I'm in favor of expanding a co-responder approach to the issue so that we have multiple resources responding and interacting with that community to actually solve problems.
All right, thank you. Next question is on training. In a recent survey of active duty officers conducted by the Little Hoover Commission, over half reported that they felt some subjects had not been covered adequately by existing training. Mental health crises were commonly reported as concern, along with the use of force and de-escalation tactics. Respondents overwhelmingly agreed that the training outcomes and effectiveness were lacking, and that peace officers' standard and training should monitor outcomes and adjust accordingly. What resources will you commit beyond the current crisis intervention training to help improving training on de-escalation and the use of force that will lead to measurable improvement of outcomes for historically underrepresented communities? And for the sake of time, if you could just answer this as brief as possible.
I'll do my best. Thank you. Great question. Another focus priority of mine, driving down use of force incidents. Many of you know we created dashboards for the public so you can go in and look and see incidents of uses of force, what that looks like in the community, what levels of force are used. We do it in a very granular level, much more so than most other agencies. And it's something we really study because it translates into better treatment of the community, fewer injuries to members of the public, fewer injuries to our own employees, and it's really the right way to police. We've made tremendous inroads in reducing citizens' complaints based on our interactions with the community, about 30% reduction in citizens' complaints, and our use of force incidents continue to decline. Not only the number of incidents we have, but the nature of the force that's used. We see some really excellent restraint used by our deputies in the community, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done in this way.
And likewise, I'll try and make this as quick as possible. But training is really important for our officers. I think that Ventura County does an exceptional job of training. You know, the state requires 600 hours, and here in Ventura County, we provide 900 hours. So 50% more than what's required by the state is given here in Ventura County. Our briefings are opportunities, not just in the jail, but in patrol, to reinforce that training and learn from other agencies that have used too much force or had an opportunity to de-escalate when they did not. And I think our officers do a very good job of doing this. Body cameras have also helped tremendously. You know you're being watched all the time on both sides of the camera. This is part of what we've done from a technology standpoint to help make sure officers are on their best behavior, and the community is as well. The training needs to be robust and needs to be continual for us to be successful. The de-escalation, how we handle calls, which we have evolved on, where we are withdrawing from calls where we traditionally would have continued to advance. These type of interactions are really important for us to make sure that we are only having to use force when absolutely necessary, and all the times we can actually remove ourselves from it so that we don't have a negative outcome.
Thank you. And this is the final question before the candidates are given, provided the opportunity for closing remarks. Again, let's try to keep this within the 2 minutes. There's a perception among some in our communities that both of you have spent considerable amount of time during this campaign currying the favor of individuals and groups who actively violated our county's public health regulations and who advocated overturning the 2020 presidential election. You might imagine that many residents who don't subscribe to such views would question your candidacies after you sought those endorsements. With ballots appearing in mailboxes across the county this week, can each of you tell us why residents who prioritize social justice and racial justice issues should vote for you?
It's to me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question. I speak to any group or any individual that seeks an audience. I serve every member of the community. I've sought no such endorsements, but I have spoken to groups that were formed out of opposition to the health orders that could be considered extremists in some ways because they've asked me to speak. They wanted to hold me accountable for decisions I made, things I did or didn't do during the health crisis that we had over the last couple of years. And so I believe my responsibility, my duties as sheriff is to meet with groups regardless of political bents, regardless of how they were formed, what their beliefs are. I'm also an very active participant in the county's public safety racial equity advisory group. And I enjoy meeting with those individuals and being put to the test as I often am. And so that's something that, I take pride in, is meeting with anyone in the community that wants an audience.
Sheriff, so if, of course, that's consistent with your own values, meaning you voluntarily meet with these groups, and you also have the choice to not meet with these groups. Is that correct?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
One thing about campaigning that I'm learning, this is, I'm not a politician. I've been a cop for 31 years. I was a cadet before that. So my entire adult life, I've been in law enforcement. But when you're running for office, your goal is to speak to as many people as you can to talk about why you want change. And that's what I've done. And my message has been consistent with every group that I've met with. I think we need a change here in Ventura County, which is why I'm running. I think that we could do a better job in engaging with our community through community partnerships. When I was the chief in Thousand Oaks, I reached out to groups like Buen Vecino, Adelante, and others to help those who feel there was some disparate treatment in the community so that they knew they had a voice. And that voice was through the office of the sheriff, through me as the commander at the time. I also strongly believe that our interaction with our community need not be measured by the number of tickets we write or the number of arrests we make, but on the outcomes of the safety of our community. There's no doubt that there are people out there seeking to do us harm, and we need to do everything to hold them accountable in conjunction with the DA's office to make sure those that are doing harm to our community are held accountable to that. But at the same time, it's important that our officers are not tasked with going out and trying to collect as many tickets and citations as they can or arrests as they can, as though they have something to turn in like their homework. I want them to focus on outcomes, not inputs, because those inputs are potentially disparately treating people in our community unfairly. Once again, I've got a long history of working with groups. I spoke in front of many groups here during this campaign, not to share their ideology, but to share with them my view on policing and why I feel like I'm a better choice for sheriff.
And have you met with groups, or spoken before groups that were actively trying to overturn the 2020 presidential campaign?
I spoke with several groups, and to be honest, there was one that I spoke with that I don't know, and I've heard from several people that were not happy that I spoke to them, because when I got invited, I didn't know what their background was. And it wasn't until the flyer came out and I had already agreed to speak, and I saw the flyer and I was not happy that that was the group that I was speaking in front of. Now, much to my surprise and thankfulness, there was only a couple people that showed up, but my message to that group didn't change.
All right, thank you. Sheriff, you have the opportunity to provide closing remarks.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to present myself at this forum. It's really important that our community pays attention to what's going on in local elections, and I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. I'm driven to fight for public safety in our county. It's been my life's work. I believe we have a winning strategy. Ventura County, according to the Civic Alliance, is the safest of the 15 largest counties in the state. And it's not an accident. We have a winning strategy here in Ventura County, and it doesn't involve just issuing citations and making arrests. It involves proactive work on the front end, working with the youth. We've actively pursued grant funding. We have $1 million youth reinvestment grant to divert young people who are going astray and give them opportunities to be successful by supporting them in mentoring and giving them skills to where they can avoid a life of crime, avoid drugs, and have a pathway for success in the future. We work with people in our custody to get them out of mental illness, to treat drug addiction. We have innovative programs throughout the agency in that respect, and we do a pretty darn good job on the back end of tracking down offenders and bringing them to justice. Those things together in cooperation with the strong relationship we have with our public is what keeps Ventura County safe. I understand this. It's something I've promoted, I've fully supported. It's why I want to continue serving as sheriff. I have a number of projects that I've completed during my first term, many others that are in midstream, and I want to see those through. That's why I'm running for re-election, is to serve this community.
Thank you.
And likewise, my entire adult life, I've been in law enforcement. All I want to do is work to keep our community safe. My family lives here. My children go to school here. I've had the opportunity to develop numerous programs for our community. Threat assessment to deal with active shooters in our schools. Active shooter training for people to understand what to do in the event it happens. Stand Proud, which is a program that I helped develop with our counselor in Thousand Oaks to deal with bullying in our middle schools. Safe Passage to deal with gang memberships and trying to reduce those who are entering gangs by providing more resources so that they knew how they had other opportunities. By providing laptops and Wi-Fi, they were well suited to be prepared with tutors from Cal Lutheran University to be successful in school. And fortunately, we started that process when we did, because when the pandemic struck, had we not had that in place, there's a lot of these communities who would not have had the access to Wi-Fi to be able to do schooling from home. Policing is way more than just writing tickets and making arrests. Our officers need to be engaged with the community. They need to be able to talk to our community members and not feel like they're on the clock to go get another arrest or ticket. This is where the disparity starts. If they don't feel connected with their community, the community is not going to get the service they deserve. I want our community, our business owners, to get to know the officers that are serving them. Because with that together, we're going to be able to solve problems much more effectively and have much longer standing solutions that are beneficial to all. I'm Jim Fryhoff, and I'm running for sheriff.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you both for taking the time to appear before this coalition and answer these questions. Again, we hope that you will continue to engage no matter whether or not you win or lose. Continue to engage with this community stakeholders, and we wish you the best. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, whether you're in person as well as live stream. This concludes the sheriff's debate part of this forum. We will commence with the DA's debate in just a few minutes as we reassemble. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody again for coming. The same format will apply to the district attorney's race and the candidate forum. And as Mr. Barajas may explain further, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer their questions, as well as 30 seconds to rebut if necessary or requested. And without any further ado, It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you all our moderator for this forum, Dr. Frank P. Barajas. He is the professor of United States history at Cal State University Channel Islands. He has worked since his return to Ventura County in 2001. With specialization in the history of Southern California, Professor Barajas has published peer-reviewed essays on agricultural labor in Ventura County, the Sleepy Lagoon trial, Oxnard schools, and the 2004 implementation of a civil gang injunction in the city of Oxnard. He is also a lifelong resident of Ventura County, except for his stint at Fresno State, my hometown of Fresno. Thank you, everybody. Please welcome Dr. Frank Barajas.
Thank you, Rabia. I'm just going to go over and welcome to the second part of this forum, everyone. I'll go over briefly the ground rules again. A coin toss before the forum was won by District Attorney Nasarenko, and he then deferred to Deputy District Attorney John Barrick. So we'll go from there. I will address the questions to both candidates. Each candidate will be expected to answer every question within 2 minutes. And the timekeeper will give a 1-minute marker and also a 30-second marker, and I will stop politely if needed each of the candidates. The moderator may permit a candidate to provide a 30-second response or rebuttal at the end. Candidates will have 2 minutes at the end for closing statements. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the candidates. First, DA Erik Nasarenko. Like many in our audience, Ventura County, District Attorney Nasarenko is a son of immigrants. His parents fled Ukraine during the Second World War and arrived in the United States after spending 5 years in refugee camps. They taught Erik the importance of giving back and helping others, values that Erik believes are essential to his job and mission as district attorney. Now we have Senior Deputy DA John Barrick. He says he is a 17-year prosecutor with the Ventura County District Attorney's Office, who grew up in Oxnard, as I did, John, and graduated from Oxnard High School in 1987. Although John currently serves in the Major Crimes Homicide Unit, he has gained experience in a variety of matters due to the numerous types of cases he has prosecuted throughout his career, including burglaries, robberies, domestic violence, child abuse, violent assaults, and cold case murders. In fact, one of John's cold cases will be featured this Friday night, May 6th on A&E, Network's Cold Cases Files, quote unquote, which will air at 9 o'clock. Please welcome John Barrick. I'll start off with, again, we had a coin toss, and DA Nasarenko won, but he deferred the first question to Senior Deputy Prosecutor John Barrick. And here we go. The California Racial Justice Act prohibits racial discrimination in convictions and sentences and creates a process to challenge racial discrimination at trial or following conviction. Still, systemic racism is widely perceived throughout the state in charging practices, plea negotiations, sentencing recommendations, and more. How well do you believe Ventura County has complied with the Racial Justice Act? And how will you identify and address any systemic racism that exists within your office?
So I can just speak to you from my personal experience. Ventura County is actually very blessed. We have really great prosecutors, and I have never seen one of our prosecutors ever prosecute anyone more heavily or harshly because of their race or ethnicity. And I can tell you, I have never done that. I've never once considered someone's race at all when I prosecuted them. I've always been proud of the fact that I'm an aggressive prosecutor, and because I've always put victims first. And so I guess to answer the question, I would say I believe Ventura County is adequately following that law and not prosecuting anyone based on their ethnicity or any other factor. We look at the circumstances of the offense, we file the appropriate charges, and we prosecute. And that's what I have seen from my coworkers. That is myself, something that I've done. A little bit about my background. I prosecuted hate crimes for 6.5 years. And during that time, I prosecuted every defendant with the same aggressiveness, regardless of who they were. I've prosecuted white supremacists, and I've defended all manner of victims, including transgendered. And again, I did it with the same vigor and aggressiveness I've always prosecuted my cases and always will.
Thank you. District Attorney?
I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Barajas, the social justice organizations that have convened tonight's forum, Pacifica High School, and all of you for joining us this evening. One of the ways that we can address any bias, implicit or explicit, is through hiring, by making sure that we hire attorneys and investigators, which is what we are doing, that are reflective of the broad diversity of Ventura County. I'm very proud of the attorneys and the investigators we have hired. Most recently, we brought in from Santa Barbara County a Spanish-speaking investigator, Freddy Padilla. We also brought in from the Ventura County Sheriff's Department a Spanish-speaking investigator, Jose Lopez, and we are now about to hire a new female Latina investigator very shortly. We also have broadened the number of prosecutors, bringing in those who come from socioeconomically distressed communities, in particular, those who come from communities of color, because I believe when they bring those backgrounds, experiences, and insights into this position, it will help to continue even greater justice, equity, and inclusivity in all aspects of our profession. But I will say to you that we have to train, and that's exactly what we have done. We have trained on AB 3070 to talk about the use of peremptory challenges at trial. And our prosecutors, the men and women, as well as our investigators and our victim advocates, will continue to represent justice, to look at the facts and circumstances of each case, and make the decisions accordingly. We do have an outstanding team of advocates, prosecutors, and investigators, and I want to expand the diversity within those ranks in the years and months to come.
Thank you. Next question will go to you, District Attorney again. The District Attorney's Office works closely with police officers and sheriff's deputies. How do those relationships position you to promote police reform, particularly accountability for police misconduct and policies related to de-escalation and use of force? Given the close collaboration between your office and law enforcement, how can you overcome potential conflicts of interest when investigating and charging officers for allegations of excessive force or other misconduct?
Yeah, great question, Professor. The answer is you have a layered and complex system of engagement with law enforcement, and I'll explain that in just a moment. I want to begin by stating that we are blessed and fortunate in Ventura County to have outstanding law enforcement agencies. We work daily with them. They put their lives on the line. They respond to some very difficult and trying and life-endangering situations. In terms of our relationship, we are both a collaborative entity, but we're also an oversight one. We have a responsibility when misconduct occurs, whether it's criminal in nature or otherwise, to oftentimes investigate it. So one of the ways we do that is by ensuring that those who are engaged in the actual inquiry of somebody in law enforcement are not necessarily the ones that are working with them on a day-to-day basis. That's what I meant by we have multiple layers. So you have a chain of command. In that chain of command, reports, complaints, investigations are brought forward, but they are ultimately decided not by those who are in the trenches every day reviewing individual officers' cases, but ultimately by those who are removed, and through that removal may not necessarily have those ties that can create affinity and other types of situations.
a brief follow-up. And how does that work with, for example, police chiefs? I mean, who feel like they have the authority above immediate people in question, right?
Well, I can't speak to internal departments, but I will share with you that, again, very fortunate in Ventura County to have a monthly meeting with all the police chiefs, the captains and lieutenants of the California Highway Patrol, and our sheriff, where we roundtable issues of importance in the law enforcement community. We update one another on new laws. We've talked about, for example, I saw California Highway Patrol here, and how do we deal with issues off the 101 in terms of illegal exhibition of speed, people who are abusing state and county properties with their vehicles. So this is a forum by which we exchange information, we build trust, and ultimately we develop the lines of communication that make this community safer.
Thank you. Senior Deputy District Attorney?
You can just call me John if you want. And by the way, I wanted everyone to know that neither Jim Fryhoff, Mr. Nasarenko, nor I got together and coordinated our outfits before the debate tonight. So let me start by saying that one of the reasons I decided to run for DA was because I didn't like the way law enforcement was being treated over the last several years, especially in Ventura County. I think we have great police officers. That doesn't mean there's not room for improvement, but I believed that we needed to be more supportive of police officers and the work they do keeping us safe. And to that end, it's because of my experience and my work for crime victims that I've been endorsed by every peace officer association in Ventura County. However, my guiding principle has been and always will be victims come first. And for me, what that meant was serving crime victims and their families was more important than my pride, my ego, my professional career if necessary. And let me be blunt about this. If a police officer ever does anything to create a victim, I will prosecute that cop because my guiding principle is victims come first. I support law enforcement supports me, but I've made it very clear to them that if anyone ever does anything that warrants a criminal prosecution, I'm going to prosecute because I won't stand for anything less. Now, before I received the endorsement of all the police officer associations, I actually asked them how they felt about my stance on this. Because I don't know how many people have actually bothered to ask respective police officers how they feel. And I have yet to meet anyone who is against that. They understand change is necessary. They understand their tactics need to change. They just ask, if this is what the community wants, we'll do it, but we need to be retrained. Retraining requires money. If the community wants a different type of policing, they're all in. Like I said, I've yet to meet a police officer who said otherwise. And so, again, I support law enforcement, but I have no problems holding them accountable if they create a crime victim.
Same follow-up in regards, what's your history in working with command structures like police chiefs in other cities?
So I've been a prosecutor for over 17 years, and there's a lot of police officers I grew up with. What I mean by that is I started off my career with them. There's police officers who started off as patrol officers the same time I started off as a misdemeanor deputy, and now a lot of those have advanced into command structure. Some of them I consider very good friends. That doesn't matter because my guiding principle is victims come first. I've always followed that rule. I can't even begin to tell you how important it is to have a guiding principle. And they understand. I wanted to serve the public. It took me a long time to get here, to meander through my life, figure out what I wanted to do, and be a prosecutor. When I made that decision, I wanted to serve the public. I wanted to be a real public servant, putting the needs of the public first. If that means I have to prosecute police officers to do it, whom I respect greatly, then that's what I'm going to do, even if they're command staff.
Thank you. You have the next question too, John. According to research published by the American Psychological Association, Black youth, and I would say particularly Black male youth, often are not given the same presumption of childhood innocence as their white peers, but are mistaken as older, are presumed guilty, and face police violence when suspected of a crime. It is widely agreed that Latinx youth are treated in a similar manner. In many cases, the perceptions and the responses of school resource officers are critical to this disparity. How do you perceive the equity or lack of same in your office's record of charging children, particularly those who are referred by SROs? And follow up, another question, part of the question is, will you commit to investigating disparate treatment of children of color when deciding to charge minors as adults or to recommend enhanced sentences for children?
Just clarification, when you say children, are you speaking of juveniles?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because children, there's a certain age when children can't be prosecuted. So we're talking about someone 14 or between 14 and 17.
Yes.
Okay, so when I was in the gang unit, I was probably the most aggressive prosecutor when it came to charging juveniles, especially juveniles as adults. And I did that because I loathed gang violence. Now, growing up in Oxnard, I've been the victim of gang violence. I've been jumped, I've been threatened numerous times, and I just don't like street gangs, okay? And so to that end, though, things have changed, and people want to see more programs, and they want to see more equal treatment of juveniles and not filing as adults. If that's what society wants, then I'm all for it. You know, I have to admit that my approach wasn't always the correct one. I can say that now. But sometimes there's a juvenile, especially a 16 or 17-year-old who commits a crime that's very, very serious and hurts someone very, very badly. And there's no other approach, I believe, than treating them as adults. Laws were passed recently where we can't treat 14 and 15-year-olds as adult court anymore. We can't prosecute them in adult court at all. I have a problem with such strict, narrow following of the law because it doesn't allow for those special circumstances when maybe treating someone who's 14 or 15-year-old as an adult is appropriate. There's a case that came out of Davis, California a few years ago, and a 15-year-old dreamed of being a serial killer and actually acted out and killed an elderly couple in their bed, and he did grotesque things to their bodies during the murder and after. That person is getting out this month, and there's nothing we can do about it, which means before he can be taken off the streets forever, he's going to have to probably kill someone again. And I don't want my family to be the sacrificial lamb in that, and I don't think anyone else does either. I'm in favor of treatment programs that help juveniles to get them off the track of going to prison, but I think we need more flexibility in the law to prosecute those where I don't think we can help.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barajas. I want to begin by acknowledging the law enforcement support that I enjoy. One of whom is here, that's former Oxnard Police Chief Scout Whitney, a 31-year veteran of the department and of public safety, as well as a number of others. Former Oxnard Police Chief John Crombach, former Sheriff Jeff Dean, Simi Valley Police Chief David Livingstone, as well as Community College Police Chief Joel Justice. To answer your question, Doctor, I think the transformation in the way we approach juveniles is positive. We went in the last 15 years from a model of detention, camps, and juvenile hall to one that prioritizes community-based treatment, intervention, and support. Now, there are going to be certain cases where we are going to seek transfer of a juvenile to adult court, given the egregious or heinous nature of the crime. But, you know, today, rather a couple of days ago, I attended a Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council meeting where we talked about holistic approaches to youth crime. How do you engage a public health specialist to intervene with the family to determine what's happening? How do you address a family setting where there is no immediate family? We talked about, let's bring in coaches, let's bring in counselors. Is there somebody from a spiritual organization? How do we make sure that these individuals in those very sensitive, very difficult teenage years have positive role models and mentors? And, you know, to see that shift, that transformation in just the way we approach juveniles, I think is very healthy. I think it will reduce recidivism. I think it builds trust in our profession. And I also believe very passionately that it is the best thing for youth.
Thank you. All right. Yes, you want to respond?
I appreciate Mr. Nazarenko's answer, but again, crime victims have to come first, and there are juveniles out there who do things, very, very bad things to crime victims. And I'd love to sit up here and tell you that restorative justice programs for juveniles all work, and that's what we should be doing. But the focus of the district attorney has to be on crime victims and restoring their dignity and providing them justice whenever we can. Programs are great. I think the program should be after they've served whatever sentence the court deems is appropriate, not during, because it doesn't hold anyone accountable. Thank you.
Yes.
This area is so complex, it doesn't lend itself to sound bites or bumper stickers. What if a victim is seeking a treatment program for their son? What if the victim is seeking some type of intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy, moral recognition therapy? We have to be willing and open to all these possibilities. You know, we can't simply be retributive in nature and punishment-based. Certainly, there are some cases we have to, but we have to be broad-minded and open-minded to a range of different possibilities.
Thank you. District Attorney, California Penal Code Section 1016.3 requires that district attorneys, quote, shall consider the avoidance of adverse immigration consequences in the plea negotiation process, unquote. How would you assess your office's compliance with that code? Also, how can the DA better prioritize rehabilitation or diversion programs, particularly with DACA students, recipients, to ensure that individuals accused of low-level offenses have the greatest opportunity to recover from their mistakes without suffering such immigration consequences?
It's a great question. This is an affirmative duty. It's mandatory. The penal code section you just cited, we shall consider the potential for adverse immigration consequences in fashioning disposition and pleas as one factor. The statute does state one factor. And nevertheless, this is from the United States Supreme Court, Padilla versus Kentucky, where it said you can't mete out disproportionate punishments. That is, the sentence, if it results in some instances in deportation, may be disproportionate to the offense itself, particularly one that may be minor. Here's how we deal with it. We talk to our attorneys and we say, I want you to work with defense counsel and the public defenders when appropriate to see if we can fashion an immigration neutral plea. It won't always happen, but I'll give you a couple specific examples where it has. I know of one case where an individual was Guatemalan and they had no criminal record and 3 children. In this case, it was domestic violence in nature. There was a push. As a result of the push, there were some scratches obtained by the victim. We initially charged it as a penal code section 273.5, the infliction of corporal injury upon a dating partner or spouse. The defense came to us and said that will result in deportation. The attorney looked at the case and said, you know what? They have 3 kids, no criminal record, history of employment. We will go ahead and we will make it a 243E1, a different type of charge to avoid that immigration consequence. That's one example where you look at the case in its entirety to fashion a just remedy. You still need a consequence, absolutely. You still need to make sure this person is held accountable, but we want to make sure that we're abiding by the law in the US Supreme Court.
Thank you. John?
Well, as a district attorney, I'm sworn to uphold the law. So 1016.3 is the law, and I will uphold it. Now, in the example Mr. Nasarenko spoke about, if the 273.5 was charged as a misdemeanor, because it's what's called a wobbler, it means it can be charged as a felony or a misdemeanor. If it can be charged as if it was charged as a misdemeanor and they want to give another charge of a 243E1, which is also a misdemeanor, to avoid the immigration consequences that defendant faced, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But my problem is, what if that was charged as a felony? And then we pled it out to a misdemeanor to uphold or to protect the immigration status of that person. I don't know the facts of the case, but my problem in that scenario is, again, you have to put the victims first. The DA has to do justice. The DA has to protect the defendant's rights as well as the crime victims. But when it comes to criminal defendants, the role of the DA is twofold. Number one, to ensure that all their constitutional rights are upheld. Number two, to ensure that any sentence they receive is fair and just under the circumstances of the case. After that, it's not my job to protect them. My job is to protect crime victims. So for the example that Mr. Nasarenko just proposed, I wouldn't be objecting to a disposition like that, as long as I knew that the 273.5 wasn't a felony. The role of the district attorney, it has to be to put crime victims first.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we did. In this case, the spouse is saying, I want my husband to remain in this country. I want him to be part of their children's lives. I need him economically. This was a one-off. It hadn't happened before. So that's how we take 1016.3 and marry it with a victim's voice to achieve a just outcome.
Thank you. John, you have the next question too again. Arresting or finding homeless residents and non-violent drug users, many of them whom experiencing mental health challenges for minor crimes often makes it harder for these community members to find housing and jobs and to access treatment for addiction or other social services. Governor Newsom has proposed new care courts, quote unquote, requiring counties to provide comprehensive treatment and housing to people with debilitating psychosis. By the way, CARE stands for Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment. The question is, what is your stance on prioritizing the use of the criminal justice system when addressing issues related to mental illness and homelessness, in favor of promoting diversion and community-based responses following the commission of minor offenses?
So let me just say, I'm not a fan of Governor Newsom. However, that CARE program is probably the first thing he's ever said that I have found that I've actually agreed with. I'm generally not in favor of programs for defendants while they're in the criminal justice system. I'm a big believer in accountability. What I'm also a believer in is not continuing to punish people once they've served their sentence, whatever that is. As a society, if we really want to fix problems and fix the criminal justice system and make it fair and equitable, we need to be doing two things. Number one, we need to be proactive in our approach, especially in the area of homelessness, drug use, and mental illness. And we need to be more restorative so we can re-enter people once they've served their sentence back into society to avoid recidivism. Asking a prosecutor to do these things takes away our focus, which is from crime victims. I'm not against programs. I'm not against helping defendants. I'm not against reintegrating people back into society successfully. It's not the prosecutor's job to do those things. My job is to protect the rights of defendants, to make sure they get fair and equitable treatment while they're involved in the criminal justice system, and to ensure that any sentence is fair and just. But my primary goal is putting victims first. One thing that I would really love to see, if we're serious about restorative justice, is we need to stop punishing people after they serve their sentences. While I'm a big believer in accountability, I'm also a believer in not continuing to punish people. And we do that through rap sheets. Someone is convicted of certain crimes and that stays with them forever. I would be in favor of some sort of process or program where if someone adheres to certain protocols for a given number of years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, those convictions should be removed from their rap sheet and never be considered again, even strike offenses. I would be very much in favor of something like that. But asking me and my job, when my focus is on crime victims, to care more about what the criminal defendant went through, the person who hurt somebody else, I'm not in favor of that.
District Attorney.
In my 14 years in this work, I can count on so many different hands and toes how many victims have come to me and said, Erik, can you find a treatment program for him or her? Can you find detoxification? Can you go ahead and find a psychiatric facility for them to be in long term? That was the victim's voice. That's what the victim was asserting they wanted on their behalf, for their public safety, for that of their family, and for that of their loved ones. So much of crime is complex, it's familial, and frankly, it has its origins in addiction, economic dislocation, job loss, lack of housing. It is complex and myriad, and we have to accept that and understand it. You know, as DAs, we can look at all the complexity and both mete out consequences and punishment when the facts and circumstances warrant it and somebody needs to be incapacitated. We have to be no nonsense and unrelenting, but there are other times we have to be broad-minded, compassionate, and open-minded. That's why I started the first ever mental health unit, to prioritize treatment in appropriate cases over jail and incarceration. I also formerly worked on behalf of our homeless court to seek out opportunities where individuals could have fines, fees, and some low-level misdemeanors removed or deleted in exchange for completion of community service, treatment program, or rehabilitation. To answer your question, Doctor, with respect to the CARES program, I support it. I think it's a step in the right direction, although I do so with a bit of a caveat. We have to create the infrastructure in counties to support CARES Court. For example, if someone said, Eric, do you have a magic wand? I said, well, give it to me. And if I had it, I'd say, can we establish a in-county sober living drug treatment facility here for both men and women so that we could have people go there rather than out of county? That would be something that would make a big difference in the lives of victims and our defendants.
Thank you. Yes, you can.
The problem we have, we can sit up here all day and talk about wonderful programs, but we don't have the infrastructure and we don't have the support we need. The state of California grants us these programs and says, you will consider those, and then never gives us the infrastructure. Have anyone here ever heard of judicial diversion? See, let me tell you about this, because we had a mental health diversion program, and it was actually had some limited success. And I say limited because the mentally ill were only getting the treatment during the time that the criminal justice system had jurisdiction over them. And then once they
Quickly, time's up.
okay, once they overcame their problems, the jurisdiction was lost, but then they would reoffend again because they didn't have that help that they needed. Judicial diversion has preempted mental health diversion in misdemeanor cases because it's easier.
Okay.
And so now the mentally ill aren't getting the help they need.
Thank you. Okay, that's your turn. District Attorney, this is a community trust question. In our county, the District Attorney's Office has traditionally not been seen to have centered the needs of those people who most depend upon the office to protect and advance their rights. Low income and our working poor, senior community, and our intellectually and developmentally disabled community members depend on the DA's office for protection. How can the DA's office heighten its civil division to protect the most vulnerable in our community from consumer fraud, notary fraud, and other civil offenses that affect people's day-to-day lives? What additional resources and support should the DA's office bring to the civil side, in particular when it comes to consumer protection?
Thank you, Doctor. We established a notarial fraud task force. Eduardo Miranda and a prosecutor are a part of that task force. And part of their job is to root out these charlatans who frankly prey upon the immigrant community, representing themselves as attorneys, dispensing legal advice when they're not qualified to do so, and taking large sums of cash without giving any advice or giving fraudulent and improper advice. So you take these specific consumer-based frauds and you target them with task forces as well as with resources. I'm very committed to doing that when these issues emerge. For example, price gouging with home COVID testing kits. Think back a couple months ago. We have a specific prosecutor who was looking at complaints of price gouging by retail outfits. So you have to protect the consumer. This is financial loss. It tears asunder communities and our sense of financial well-being. And I will also add that one of the ways that we engage in civic life and fabric is by being accessible, by being open, and by being engaged. I have made it a point to be a district attorney who not only is in the courtroom, but also is in the community. To give you some specific examples, I spoke recently to the Amgen Asian Association about hate crimes. I was recently at a mosque speaking about Islamophobia. not too long ago here in Oxnard, talking about cyberbullying in schools that target the African-American community at New Progressive Church. These are ways that we build lines of connectivity, lines of contact, and also ultimately, I believe it helps public safety, because when people understand that the DA and law enforcement are there to assist and serve them, there will be even greater disclosure and reporting of crimes.
Thank you. John?
So one of the areas in criminal law and criminal justice where I do find it inequitable is the way we prosecute theft crimes. I feel that crimes more associated with poorer people are prosecuted more harshly than theft crimes more associated with people who have means, people who have money. And yet it's fraud and it's variants of fraud that is far more destructive to a society than any robbery or home burglary could be. Now, I'm not saying robberies and home burglaries aren't serious, because they are, and they're treated that way. But a lot of times the way frauds are prosecuted, if the person just pays the money back, we reduce it to a misdemeanor. And I don't like the way that we prosecute fraud because of that aspect. I believe when it comes to fraud, because of the damage it causes not only to society, but specifically to crime victims, we should be prosecuting fraud crimes a lot more heavier than we do. And so I am all in favor of anything we can do to increase resources to any civil division or anything else to increase the punishments of fraud, because I do find that far more destructive.
Can I respond?
Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead.
I would dispute that. We are very aggressive on fraud-based financial crimes. You look at what senior deputies like Mark Leventhal and Howard Weiss, Andrew Reed, Karen Wald, workers' compensation fraud, for example. We have secured felonies. We have secured significant jail sentences and restitutions. These are cases that we take seriously, we prosecute vigorously, and will continue to do so.
Thank you.
So Karen Wold, Howard Wise, and Mark Leventhal are fantastic. They're three of the best attorneys that we have in the office. And they do prosecute fraud very, very aggressively, but we can do better. And I think we should.
Thank you. John? State law AB 640 requires the Office of Emergency Services to develop training for district attorneys in the investigation and prosecution of sexual assault cases, child sexual exploitation cases, and child sexual abuse cases, including training in the unique emotional trauma experienced by victims of those crimes. That training course also required to cover the investigation and prosecution of sexual abuse cases involving victims with developmental disabilities. Given that people with disabilities are 7 times more likely to be victims of sexual abuse than their non-disabled peers, how do you plan to support victims being interviewed in your office who have an intellectual disability, are nonverbal, use an assistive technology speaking device, or have invisible disabilities? And ending part of this question is, can you speak to other ways you will increase access to the justice system for community members with intellectual and developmental disabilities? I know it's a lot.
I'm first. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, like my principle is victims come first. I'll do anything and everything to work with experts in the field who will assist us in investigating any crimes, especially sexual in nature, against the disabled, because they need our full protection as well. I'm not an expert on the subject. I don't pretend to be, but there are experts on the subject. And whatever they say we need to do in order to assist them and be able to prosecute these crimes and get the people that hurt them, I'm all in. You don't have to convince me.
Thank you. District Attorney?
We have this outstanding group, the Public Safety Racial Equity Advisory Group, and there are representatives from the disabled and disability rights community on it. And we are actually going to be meeting with one of those representatives shortly to see how do we incorporate into our Family Justice Center models a disability right component that both informs our prosecutors, victim advocates, and investigators about how sensitive and important these cases are, but also helps to bridge understanding between the disability rights community and our office. So I have seen sex cases involving disabled individuals They are difficult and they are time intensive, but they are equally as important as any other sexual assault case. I think we have to accept that as our premise. It is incumbent upon us to take each and every victim as we find them, irrespective of disability, irrespective of status, of color, heritage, sexual orientation. We have to understand that when we serve victims, we do so in a way that builds humanity, dignity, as well as voice into their allegations. We understand where they're coming from and the disability they may have. And also we work with them to seek justice, whether or not that's giving them access as we would any other victim or giving them opportunities for investigation as we would any other victim. So I'm very hopeful that our Family Justice Center, the one that we will have in the city of Oxnard shortly, as well as our existing one in Ventura, will be a bridge to help facilitate understanding and greater justice over these cases.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney, you have a question regarding hate crimes, domestic terrorism. In recent years, we've seen a rise in incidents that have stoked fear and terror in communities of color, and incidents that have involved self-identified hate groups. 2 years ago, a series of actions were committed in opposition to Advocacy for Racial Justice. A woman who pepper sprayed protesters from her car without provocation, men who vandalized Black Lives Matter signs on private property. More recently, neo-Nazis have hung banners from overpasses in an illegal manner. None of these incidents resulted in prosecution. Why? And how do you plan to address such hate crimes and the activity of hate groups in the future?
Great question. We have prosecuted successfully a number of hate crimes. One in particular stands out because I just spoke about it. A Syrian woman was speaking Arabic. There was a passerby who found that offensive. A battery resulted. We prosecuted that case both as a battery as well as a hate crime, a special allegation. Similarly, there was a case involving an object thrown at a moving vehicle wherein there was a Black Lives Matter display. We too prosecuted that case, as we did with the same suspect, a case where he went ahead and ripped up and essentially vandalized a BLM poster. So we do, when the facts and circumstances warrant it, address these cases. With respect to the freeway overpasses and banners, I want to get to that. We discussed this at our committee meeting. We have sort of two statutes at our disposal. The first of which allows the California Highway Patrol to disperse a group when that group is disturbing the orderly flow of traffic. And Caltrans does indeed have the authority to remove a banner that's affixed to state property, namely an overpass, and the California Highway Patrol can enforce that. There has to be a certain notice requirement per the Streets and Highways Code that the enforcement agency has to perform. If after that notice, the banner still remains, they can go ahead and issue a citation. So we've had these very constructive meetings with the California Highway Patrol where we've talked about this law, the one I just mentioned, both Streets and Highways Code, as well as the California Vehicle Code. And, you know, this is something that has a First Amendment constitutional layer. And the issue is we can't subject ourselves to litigation. So every banner that's hanging has to be treated like any other banner. So if you have one that's hanging that's saying, "Thank you, first responders," and one that's saying "White Lives Matter," they both have to equally be removed because we don't want to engage in content specific restrictions. That's a First Amendment violation.
So this is even if it's done in an illegal manner.
You cannot place the banner on state property. It's the affixing of the banner on state property.
Thank you. John?
I don't think there's any way for me to communicate to all of you how much I abhor the idea of someone committing a crime against another person because of their perceived or actual relation to a protected class. I think it's about the most un-American thing you can do. As I stated earlier, I actually prosecuted hate crimes for 6.5 years. and I prosecuted it pretty aggressively. And it's because of my prosecution, I actually was awarded the 2014 Sherwood Prize by the Anti-Defamation League for prosecuting hate. Only 2 prosecutors in the history of our office have received that award, and I was one of them. Let me give you an idea of how aggressively I prosecuted hate crimes. 2012, 2 white supremacists walked into a Vallarta supermarket in Oxnard. They were celebrating because one of them just got out of prison. While they were in there, they were walking around yelling racial epitaphs. They got in line behind a Caucasian woman and her African-American son and proceeded to make threats. So we charged both defendants. One made the threats. The other one never made the threats. I prosecuted both of them. I prosecuted the second one under an aiding and abetting theory of criminal threats, which meant at trial, I had to prove that the one who did not make the threats knew what his friend was going to say before he said it. I took that case to trial. There was not a single person in my office who thought I was going to win, and I did. And that person got 7 years in prison. That's how aggressive I am when it comes to combating hate crimes. That's how aggressive I am to prosecuting hate crimes. Now, the incidents that were mentioned in the question, I don't know the facts. I don't know why they weren't prosecuted. I'd like to find out, because I abhor hate crimes, and I think my record and my reputation stand for that.
Thank you. John, you have the last question, and it is this. And I'll give you a little context to it. In 2009, I attended a memorial for Alice Greenfield McGrath, and she's known as a longtime activist. She died at the age of 92. Historically, she's significant because she was the executive secretary for the Sleepy Lagoon Defense Committee. And in the memorial of 20 people, a private memorial, former district attorney spoke on her behalf, and because he knew her well. And he spoke to the issue of mercy. And I found that intriguing, that a prosecutor, district attorney would talk about mercy. I had not expected that from this person. In that regard, share with us how you have applied grace and mercy in your career as a prosecutor, and how this may or may not differ in your role as district attorney.
So there's a few things I've always prided myself on. It's my directness and my honesty, and it's also my willingness to be fair. I've actually been told that there are people that I put in jail and prison who've since gotten released who are going to vote for me because they respected the fact that I always treated them fairly. I believe in being upfront and honest with people. I believe in being direct with people, even if you don't like my answers, even if you don't like the sentence I receive. In fact, I did a fundraiser about a month ago, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, "Hey, Mr. Barrick, do you remember me?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yes, I remember you. I sent you to prison." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I just want you to know I'm doing really well now, and I wanted to thank you." And I said, and he goes, "I'm going to vote for you." And I said, "Well, I understand if you don't want to. That's okay." When we talk about mercy, like I said, victims come first, but that doesn't mean I'm a rabid dog going after criminals just 'cause. Okay, I always treat them with respect, and I'm always fair, and I'm always honest. I always tell them what I think, why I'm thinking it. I'm open to the possibility of being wrong, because as I've always said, I'd rather get it right than be right. My wife's here in the audience. She tells me all the time how wrong I am about things, and so she's laughing because she knows it's true. But I'm completely open to the possibility that I'm wrong about things. But I've always one of the things I've always valued about myself is in handling my job is the fact that while I am aggressive and while I put victims first, I have shown mercy and I have been fair with criminals and I have been fair with defendants, even some of my murder suspects. I'm always fair to them until the jury comes back with a guilty verdict.
Thank you. District Attorney.
When I think of mercy, I think one of the underpinnings of mercy is hope. We have to believe in the transformative power of change, because in order to show mercy, we need to believe and have hope and conviction. And that's the way I like to lead this office, both firm, but also with directions of hope and forgiveness, and when appropriate, looking at a broad and full picture. I'll give you a specific example, and John will know what I'm talking about. I prosecuted an individual by the name, and it was a felony, and he was later slain. He was murdered. And I remember his mom inviting me to the funeral, and I went to that funeral here in Oxnard. And, I still think about it to this day because I know that the mom lost her son and how deeply grieving and how horrific that was. And when I think about hope and mercy, I think about you sometimes have to push back on people. You can't do that. You don't have enough money. If you make that decision, it's going to go ahead and create a backlash. We're going to create a domestic violence shelter at our Family Justice Center. We're going to open a new Family Justice Center for victims here in Oxnard for Mixteca, Indigenous, and monolingual Spanish communities. We're going to go back and test cold cases to see if there's DNA evidence for old rapes. We're going to continue to strive to see if we can build diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusivity into this office. That takes mercy, it takes courage, and it also takes hope. And that's what I'd like to continue to bring to this great office of men and women in the district attorney's office.
Thank you. Now we're at the closing statements portion of the forum. John, you have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
Thank you. So like I said, I like to be honest and I like to be direct with people. And I'm fully aware that most of the people in this audience aren't going to be voting for me, and that maybe you didn't like some of my answers to the questions. And I want you to know that's okay. If I win this election, I'm the district attorney. I want you all to hear this. And if there's anything you take away from tonight, please take this. You will all have a voice in my office. You will be heard. You will be listened to. Like I've stated, I'm not interested in being right. I'm only interested in getting it right. My focus is on crime victims, and I think I've made that pretty clear, and restoring their dignity and getting the justice they deserve. But perhaps there's a different path, and if there is, I want to hear it. If people have different ideas, I want to hear them. And if they're good ideas, I want to implement them. Understand that everything I have 2 caveats to any changes. Number 1, I don't want any further evisceration of crime victims' rights than have already happened. Number 2, I won't support anything that puts law enforcement lives in further danger than they already are. But if there's an idea that completely is different from mine, but I think it's going to work, I'll implement it, and I'll give you the credit. Because again, I just want to do what's right for this community where I grew up. Thank you.
Thank you, John. District Attorney.
I've been honored to serve for the last 15 and a half months as the Ventura County DA, and I would ask for your support when the ballots begin arriving next week to remain in this job. We've accomplished a great deal, the men and women of the district attorney's office. We have achieved a new sense of mission while retaining the traditions of our old mission. That is, we seek innovation when appropriate, but at the same time fulfill and serve our core mission of prosecution. A mental health unit, the first time we have established that in the office of district attorney. $3 million appropriated for a family justice center here in Oxnard, with the county of Ventura expected to deliver another 2. A new domestic violence shelter to give women, children, a sense of hope, a sense of safe space after they leave an abusive situation. We have continued to remain true by prosecuting those who harm and hurt others. We've already had 26 jury trials in 2022, getting the wheels of justice back up and moving despite the slowdowns and shutdowns due to the pandemic. Inherently, as your district attorney, I see my mission as both prosecuting crime, holding offenders accountable, but also preventing it. And I believe one of the greatest ways we can prevent crime is by reaching out and serving our youth in schools, in restorative justice, and by taking opportunities where we meet them where they are and say, we're going to give you another pathway. We were all teenagers once, and we understand that there are temptations, there are bad peer networks, And what I really like about what we're doing in the juvenile arena now is we're saying we want to pair you with mentors, positive role models. It may not be your immediate family. It may be a second cousin, an uncle, an aunt, a coach, a counselor, a teacher, a pastor, but we're going to do that because we believe in you and your future. I ask for your vote in the next couple of weeks, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senior Deputy District Attorney John Barrick. Thank you, District Attorney Erik Nasarenko, for your participation and your answers to the audience. I also want to thank the audience for being here live and also remotely. And I also want to thank the organizations and the individuals who organized this event. It's been an honor to serve as its moderator. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. And just of note, this forum, both the sheriff as well as the DA forum, have been recorded. If you would like a copy of the recording, please let us know. Contact myself, John Cummings, or Willie Luca in order to facilitate you or your organization getting copies of the forum. Thank you.